Hello everyone, this is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Rebel. I'm a few minutes late. I was doing a domain forwarding thing for Carlos. In any case, we're here ready to rock and roll. This is the I Love Jeet Kune broadcast number 12. And this is the one all about the threes. Did I get that right? The threes, yeah. Okay, for my friend Jennifer, I have to do the t-shirt thing. There we go. All right, it's a scene from, well, anybody who's on, you guys know what's, you just type in and tell me what scene it's from. So the one all about the threes. Before we get into today's broadcast, I want to just say something about, a little bit about why we do what we do here at I Love Jeet Kune. Actually, the reason is in the name itself. It's out of a love for this art and philosophy, a love, respect, admiration for and inspiration by Bruce Lee, a love, respect, admiration, inspiration by, but relationship with Dan and Asano and my Jeet Kune colleagues. This became one of the most important aspects of my life, and ended up shaping a huge part of my life into what it is today. So I'm keenly aware of the benefits of what some of us call the Jeet Kune lifestyle, and so one of our goals is to share aspects of that Jeet Kune lifestyle with as wide an audience as possible. And as a social media platform, Facebook, the I Love Facebook group allows us to do just that. All right, so let's move into a quick recap of last week's broadcast, where we talked about the 4 phases of Jeet Kune training. So I told you that in my adaptation of the 4 phases of training, phase 1 centers around the use of coordination drills. Phase 2 centers around the use of combat drills, right? So you take the coordination drills and you convert them into combat drills. Phase 3 is a blend of coordination plus combat into flow drills. And then phase 4 is what we call freelance drills, which is really another way of saying you get to do whatever the heck it is that you feel like doing. All right, so our first topic for today is Jeet Kune's 3 stages of development. So the source materials for today, okay, I gotta check and see if this thing works. Source materials for today's broadcast are, yes it does, look at that. Jeet Kune commentaries, John Little's book, Jeet Kune, Bruce Lee's commentaries on the martial way. Then, not surprisingly, Dan and Asano's Art and Philosophy of Jeet Kune. We might do a small segment from Filipino martial arts. Again, not surprisingly, I pretty much use this on every broadcast. Junfan Jeet Kune, the textbook. And last but by no means least, the Venerable Tao of Jeet Kune. All right, so Jeet Kune's 3 stages of development. So part of this comes from some of what I'll go over. I'll read it for you. It's taken right from Sifu Dan's Art and Philosophy book, right? Where he says that it was Bruce Lee's belief that in martial art training, you go through 3 stages of development. And the Chinatown program, this is what he writes in his book, and the Chinatown program revolved around these stages. So the first stage is the primitive stage. And I swear to you, I have seen that somewhere else as the primordial stage. And it says this is the stage of original ignorance in which a person knows nothing of the art of combat. In a fight, he simply blocks and strikes instinctively, without a concern as to what is being right or wrong. Of course, he might not be so-called scientific, but he is nevertheless being himself, and his attack or his defense is fluid. All right. So if you tell somebody, I'm going to hit you in the head, defend yourself, right? And you go like this, of course their hands are going to come up and they're going to defend themselves because self-preservation is an instinct. It's a natural born instinct, right? So, you know, he doesn't know anything about what a block is, but he just responds. A really interesting aspect of this is, I'm sure you guys know Tony Blauer and the spear system. Carlos and I have spent a little bit of time with Blauer and with people who teach his method. SPEAR is an, what do you call it, acronym for spontaneous protection enabling accelerated response, right? The SPEAR system. And so from what I recall, the SPEAR system takes advantage of a reflex where you might do something like this, and then they convert that startle reflex into effective and efficient technique, right? So in my conversation with Tony Blauer when he was here in Miami, I discovered that he's a huge Bruce Lee fan. And he actually did start out the way a lot of us started out in training with Jeet Kune Do people, but then he took his Bruce Lee influence into a specific direction. So more power to him. The spear system, I highly recommend it. But it's just one of those things which has what I call a hidden Jeet Kune Do origin, or maybe even a hidden Jeet Kune Do influence. So first stage, the primitive stage. The second stage is the stage of sophistication. And again, I know that somewhere I have seen this written as the mechanical stage. And this begins when a person starts his training. So I'm reading from Sifu Dan's book here. He is taught different ways of blocking and striking, and various ways of kicking and standing, breathing and thinking. Unquestionably, he has gained a scientific knowledge of combat, but unfortunately, his original self and sense of freedom are lost, and his action no longer flows by itself. His mind tends to freeze at different moments for calculation and analysis. Even worse, he might be intellectually bound and maintaining himself outside the actual reality. So I'm sure there are a lot of us who have maybe as a practitioner yourself, or even as an instructor, you have experienced that, where the mind freezes and the body freezes, and people are trying to calculate what it is that they should be doing in the moment, and so that that freedom is lost, right? The intellectually bound part is an interesting one, because this is where you get the silliness of my style versus your style. Which fighter, you know, like the people who are constantly asking stuff about, you know, would Bruce Lee at his peak be able to beat this MMA fighter or that, you know, and which style is the best for self-defense, and which style, the superlative, right? Always about what is the best, what is the best, what is the best. And I'm not yet tired of it, because obviously if people keep asking it, then it means that the message hasn't been delivered strongly enough as yet. There is no best. The only best there is the best that you can do, right? Because in like Bruce Lee says in Way of the Dragon, if it can help you to protect yourself in a fight, then it doesn't matter where it comes from. You should train it, right? So, but this is where a lot of people get lost in the mechanical stage, and it's not surprising. And so, as an instructor, I don't give people a really hard time when they get lost in the mechanical stage, because it is an area of immense discovery, right? So, for example, if we look at Chinese Kung Fu, in the art of Chinese Kung Fu, there are so many styles, right? So you got the Bagua, you got the Xing Yi, you got the Wing Chun, you got the Choi Le Foot, you got the this, you got the that. There's all this stuff that's going on. And so it's not surprising if people do get lost in the mechanical stage, right? In the stage of sophistication, because they're learning. You know, there's a difference between this block and whatever, right? Third stage, the stage of artlessness. which I swear to you, I have seen this somewhere as the return to the original freedom. Okay? So this occurs when, after years of serious and hard practice, he realizes that after all, Kung Fu is nothing special, and instead of trying to impose his mind, he adjusts himself to the opponent like water pressing on an earthen wall. It flows through the slightest cracks. There's nothing to try to do but be purposeless and formless like water. You know where this is going, right? All his classical techniques and standard style are minimized, if not wiped out, and nothingness prevails. He is no longer confined. So this stage of artlessness, this third stage, obviously this relates to so many things about Bruce Lee. What comes to mind, the idea expressed in the scene with the abbot in Enter the Dragon. So if all you've ever seen is the theatrical release, then you need to find yourself a special edition, or I mean, it's probably on the YouTube by now, right? But it's the scene where he's talking with the abbot after the fight with Sammo Hung, and the discussion is about technique, and he says that there is no technique, and he says this: when it's time, it hits on its own, it hits all by itself, or something, right? This is something that as regular human beings, we even non-martial artists experience in their regular everyday lives. Anybody who drives a car, you'll remember when you first started learning to drive a car, it's like you could barely keep the thing in a straight line on the road, right? But then we get to the point where it's like, you know, people are texting while they're driving. People are drinking coffee and having conversations while they're driving. I know some people who can actually drive with their left knee, right? They don't even use their hands on the steering wheel anymore, right? I'm not saying I do that, right? But they can drive with their left knee while they fiddle with the radio or whatever. That is the stage of artlessness, where you're doing stuff and your conscious mind is not even aware of the fact that that you're doing it. Not that I advocate not paying attention while you're driving on the street, especially here in Miami, right? But my point is that we can all learn to accept that when you start out in any new endeavor, you're going to be a little bit awkward with it in the beginning, right? But that's not a big deal, because if you hang tough in a little while, you go past that stage of awkwardness, and now you really get stuff, and you're so smooth with it that you can't even recall the time when you were struggling with the skill. And it's an important lesson to learn, because it's a lesson that once you've learned it yourself, you can pass that on to other people, right? Especially like younger people who would be struggling with stuff like that. So I hope you can see how when Bruce Lee says something like excuse me, before I learned the art, a punch was just a punch. After I started learning the art, a punch was no longer a punch. Now that I have truly understood the art, a punch is just a punch. That's actually, it's probably taken from a Zen saying or something, but that is really a statement that depicts those three stages of development. So, to recap, the three stages of development: the primitive or primordial stage, the stage of sophistication, aka the mechanical stage, and the stage of artlessness, or the return to the original freedom. All right, let's move on to the three stages of a technique. So I showed you the books that from where the source material comes from for today, and there are two slight variations in the three stages of a technique. So the stuff that's written in the commentaries book is a little bit different from the stuff that is written in the Tao of Jeet Kune Do. But you could see that the source material is the same, and that the author is the same. So 3 stages of a technique. So stage 1 is synchronization with self, or synchronization of self. So there are notes about building up precision and rhythm while augmenting speed progressively. application of technique with full coordination and increase in speed at various distances, which I think is illustrative, because now we're talking footwork, and then precision in all. So I think that's why in, for example, I think in Chris Kent and Tim Tackett's Jeet Kune Do kickboxing book, and also in the Fighting Method series by Bruce Lee and Mito Uehara, they start literally at the bottom with fighting position and footwork, because in synchronization with self, being able to control distance and having mobility and agility and those kinds of attributes are of paramount importance. Outside of martial art, right? Because, as you know, Jeet Kune Do, the art and philosophy of Bruce Lee. So outside of martial art, synchronization with self means getting to know who you really are, what you want in life or what you want from life, what you're trying to accomplish and stuff like that. So this is where, you know, that written thing, I showed this on one of the broadcasts a while ago. Cedro Bruce's written definite chief aim. That is part of the exercise and the experiment in becoming synchronized with oneself, right? Writing out your definite chief aim, carrying a copy of the self-confidence formula, all these things in which you invest in as part of your self-development routine. Stage 2, synchronization with the opponent. So the notes say timing and the ability to seize the opportunity when offered, distance, correct maintenance of space. So this, again, like I just said, this is where the attribute of spatial relationship or distance awareness comes into play. So now in stage 2, synchronization with an opponent, you've learned how to move yourself around, right? In stage 1, synchronization with self, right? So like your shadow boxing, we'll get into that a little bit. So you've learned how to move around in shadow boxing, or in your solo exercises, hitting the heavy bag, right? Maybe even working on the Wing Chun dummy or something. But it's all solo training, because that was stage 1, synchronization with self. Well, now what you want to do is to take that skill of self-movement to its next higher level by learning how to relate to a mobile opponent or training partner. Which reminds me, we've talked about this before, but I'll tell it to you again. 2 types of training, essentially. There's solo training and there's partner training. In solo training, there are 2 subtypes. Solo training in the air, aka shadow boxing, and solo training with the equipment. So like I said, hitting the bag, working on the Wing Chun dummy or something, but you're training on your own. Second type of training is partner training, and then 2 subtypes. First subtype being equipment training. So now your partner is feeding, or you're feeding Thai pads, focus mitts, kick shield, whatever, right? You know, partner drills with the Kali sticks or something. And then glove drills, which can be all the way from prearranged sparring drills all the way up to freelance drills, with aka free sparring, right? So synchronization with opponent is stage of a technique number 2. Outside of martial art, synchronization with the opponent is about learning how to be in relationship with other people, right? So whether it's a personal or professional relationship, it's about learning how to appreciate the point of view of other people. And in doing that, you learn how to increase and broaden your own perspective, right? I remember, I don't remember the source material, but I remember a teaching that I came across which said that a lot of relationship is really you learning more about yourself, learning what it is that you'll stand for, what it is that you'll put up with, right? And so it isn't really so much about the other person in the relationship as it is about you learning about your own self, right? Stage of a technique number 3 is synchronization under fighting condition. And the notes on this one from the two sources, from the commentaries book and from the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, say mobility. The physical ability to lengthen movements and movements of arms and legs. In other words, to increase reach. Resistance to fatigue, right, which is stamina. Spring and resilience. Physical and mental alertness. Imagination and anticipation. Courage to take chances. Speed progression, strength progression. And in the Tao, there's a little note that says, instructor attempting to provoke error by blocking lines, right? And then there's a note about timing and distance, okay? Now, for me, I don't necessarily see stage 3 as being hugely separate from stage 2. Because in constructing your sparring drills in stage 2, in partner training, you can create just about any scenario that you desire. In the Junfan Jeet Kune Do textbook, there's a list of what they call, in those days, limited sparring drills. And also in Sifu Dan's Kali book, there's a section on environmental training, right? There's like, you know, training to defend against people coming in your front door or somebody trying to come over your wall. I mean, all kinds of stuff, right? What we found is that doing these drills, right? So if it's synchronization under fighting conditions, what can add an element that you can add to these drills is to do them out of a flow drill, whether it's a simple flow drill like the jab catch drill, or if it's more complex like Chi Sao or the Hubud, right? I'm limiting myself to empty hand stuff right now. Those of you who are on board with me right now, who are cross-trained in the Filipino martial arts, and you'll know exactly what it is that I'm leaving out. But when you add the idea of a flow drill, now you can increase a lot more elements. You can work on the speed of it. You can work on the elusiveness of it. You could just go, as they say, balls to the wall and turn it into an endurance thing, right? Now, these things can be done back in combat drills in stage 2, synchronization with the opponent, because you're creating the fighting condition, even if I'm just holding the focus mitts for you, right? We can still create fighting conditions. It doesn't have to be glove drills necessarily. Outside of martial art, stage 3, under fighting conditions, think about this. Everyday life is fighting conditions, because it doesn't matter your level of success, your level of financial success, your educational level, your level of physical fitness, right? I mean, take physical fitness for itself, right? So you could have the 6-pack or the 8-pack or whatever. You could have the 7% body fat percentage and what have you. The thing is that you still have to engage in maintenance. So you still have to fight to keep everything it is that you have achieved, right? Same thing in education. There are reports of people who come out of college. So now they've spent a whole ton of money and spent a whole ton of time in their on their education, and then they get into the real world where the fighting conditions exist, and they discover that the education really didn't prepare them for a job or life in the real world. You know, which takes me back to something that Bruce Lee would always say, which is in your training, approximate the reality of the situation. You see? So that's why back in the day, Bruce Lee got himself in trouble for saying that kata, for him personally, was useless. Because he didn't view kata as being something that approximated the reality of a fighting situation. So for him, he didn't say that kata was useless for the millions of people around the world who practice it. It's just that for him personally, Bruce Lee, he didn't. And so he opted more for shadow boxing. Because shadow boxing, if you watch what boxers do, the way boxers shadow box their technique, it's identical to what they'll do in the ring. There's not a different approach to practicing technique in shadow boxing versus the way you practice, the way you would hit your opponent in the ring. But in kata, there's a difference. That's really all Bruce Lee meant about that. And Bruce Lee practiced what he preached, because we all know the famous story about the fight in Oakland with Wang Jackman. He wasn't that satisfied with his performance, and so as a result, his post-fight analysis, as a result of that fight with Wang Jackman, he stepped up the investigation into other techniques, conditioning methods, and fortunately for those of us who came later, that's part of what evolved into what we now call Jeet Kune, right? So what you can keep in mind, one of the huge takeaways from that is that these things that are called mistakes, these so-called mistakes, are things that teach you what you still need to work on. Okay, so that was the 3 stages of a technique: synchronization with self, synchronization with opponent, and synchronization under fighting conditions. Okay, so we'll move on to part 3, the 3 stages of cultivation. So stage 1, partiality, or what's known as the run-in to the extremes. Stage 2, fluidity, the 2 halves of one whole. And stage 3, emptiness, the formless form. So partiality implies that you don't yet have the full picture, or you don't yet have a full grasp of things. This is why, okay, look at it this way. This is why there are the 4 ranges of combat, aka the 4 skills of empty-handed combat, right? And I challenge you to find an example of a fighting method, an empty-handed fighting method, which is not covered by the 4 skills, right? So partiality, let me show you this. Partiality looks like this. It's in the textbook, all right? So this is what partiality looks like. Let me see if I can get a good, where is the camera, right? So if you look at the 4 circles by themselves, right, that's kicking, punching, trapping, and grappling, right? But then under there, you see how everything is blending and intersecting and almost kind of flowing from one into the other, right? So in partiality, all that stuff would be different. The 4 ranges of combat would be different. But in totality, everything is blended into a cohesive unit, right? Stage 2 of cultivation is fluidity, the 2 halves of one whole. And so, like I just showed you, that could be looked at as, okay, but no, let's see if we can make this simpler, right? So if you think about it, kicking, punching, trapping, grappling, right? Kicking and punching can be considered your stand-up, right? Or your striking. And then trapping and grappling can be considered your ground game. Now, if we take striking and we cut that in half, now we have upper body weapons and we have lower body weapons. Well, if we take the upper body weapons and we cut that in half again, we have the fist and the elbow. If we take the lower body weapons and we cut that in half, we have the knee and the foot. You see, right? If we look at grappling by itself, then you cut that in half because a lot of times in order to pull off a grappling technique, you kind of have to immobilize something, a limb or something. So, for example, if I have a guy in guard and I want to do a reversal, a scissors reversal into the mount, then it behooves me to control his hands, right? So essentially, I trap for a split second, and then I do the reversal, and now we've gone from guard to mount. So you could say that trapping is an integral part, therefore, of grappling, right? So 3 stages of cultivation: partiality, fluidity, and now number 3, emptiness, the formless form, right? So Bruce Lee said, the usefulness of a cup is in its emptiness, right? So in the 3rd stage, I think most people would agree that the third stage is then the highest level, right? The formless form. There's another quote that illustrates this, and it says, all technique is to be forgotten and the unconscious to be left alone to handle the situation. Technique will assert its wonders automatically or spontaneously. To float in totality, to have no technique, is to have all technique, right? And I remember when I was preparing this for you guys, that quote, to float in totality, to have no technique, is to have all technique, reminded me of something. So I think if you guys comment, I can see it, right? Okay, and just as I said that, Mr. Wells says, where did I get this shirt? You mean this one? I have no idea, Ray. If you were to ever see the Bruce Lee collection, you might be astounded. So this one, I have no idea where I got it from, right? It might be a time when one of my silk screeners made a shirt for me or something. Anyhow, to get back to the story, don't distract me, right? So you guys comment and tell me if you've heard this story. So it's after the Long Beach Internationals, and so people are talking to Bruce Lee, and they're like, well, you know, what style is that? Because you know, you're punching, but then you're kicking. So it looks like boxing at one time, but then you put these kicks from martial arts in. So, I mean, what style is this? And Bruce Lee is reported to have said something like, well, it's no style. So then they say, well, how can it be no style? And he says, well, because it's all styles. So then they ask, well, how can it be all styles? And he says, well, because it's no style, right? So I don't know, maybe I imagined this, but I have heard that story, right? I heard that story way back in the day. But the point of it is that in this stage of emptiness, the formless form, this is not something that you're going to get to overnight. You got to be committed at all times to your training. It's not an overnight thing. The formless form is about freedom, right? But I should point this out. You're not going to live in the formless form, right? Nobody can wake up in, you know, if you have what some people would call a third dimension existence, right? You're not going to live in the formless form all the time. It is achieved in moments of action in real life situations, right? Now, if you live a peaceful life like me, it could be achieved in a moment where it's like you got to get somewhere and you're waiting for the bus or the train, and you realize that public transportation here in Miami cannot always be depended on, and so you immediately do the quick calculation, and it's like, I got to get the car and drive instead of, you know, taking the train, right? One thing I have to tell you before we close up here about the stages of cultivation. There is an incorrect depiction floating around on the internet with this stages of cultivation, and it shows partiality. Let me get it here. I at some point I'm gonna, you know, be able to. I'll have like maybe a picture of it, and I'll put it up for you, or I'll put it up under the post when we finish this live video. It shows partiality as the stage wherein you sharpen the tool. Then fluidity is utilizing the tool, and emptiness is dissolving the tool. Now, personally, I have no idea where this came from. If anybody who's watching this here live or later on, if you know where that came from, maybe you could put a comment and tell me, but I have no idea where it came from. And I looked at it and I tried to understand whoever it is that came up with it, what they might be thinking about in trying to determine the stages. But to be honest, I couldn't get it. So, you know, but just throwing that out there to you. Okay, so let's take a quick look. We'll do one more. The 3 combat distances, because this stuff is pretty much not self-explanatory, but it's easy to get. So the 3 combat distances. So there's in range, there's brim of fire, and there's out of range. So in range, without moving, I can stick out my hands and get to you without moving. So obviously, if I can get to you, you can get to me. So this is not the distance at which we would start a fight, right? Now, one step away from in range is brim of fire. So now this is where Bruce Lee famously illustrates the idea of combat distances in Longstreet, where he says to the guy, touch me or something. And the guy takes a step and he says, your movement toward me allows me the opportunity to use my sidekick and intercept your movement. And then the third range would be out of range. So in range, brim of fire, which is one step away from in range, and then anything more than one step would be considered out of range. So this is where now, because you have to make an additional movement, this is where you can use a false attack to a positive attack. So if you see, I'm trying to think of a good example. I think it's in the fight with Han in Enter the Dragon, or it's in the scenes, the behind the scenes video. But you'll see Bruce Lee, or in the Fighting Method book, I think, you'll see where he talks about the upward sweep of the hand, right, which camouflages the lead step. So it's the upward sweep of the hand, camouflaging the lead step, and then you slide and kick. So that's a false attack to a positive attack, the use of a hand feint, right, to the kick. It could also be, an example of progressive indirect attack. So that's the three, actually, in the Fighting Method, that's the footwork that they call the burst, which I think we were talking about last week, right? So 3 combat distances: in range, brim of fire, and out of range. Okay. All right. So that pretty much brings us to we covered the topics for this broadcast. Now we'll do a thing I love, a Jeet Kune Do thing that I love. So if you look at what we just discussed, right, you can see how a lot of things that start out maybe diverse, definitely with their own name, right, but they end up coalescing into a single cohesive unit, right? So the 4 skills of combat combine with the stages of development, that combine with the stages of cultivation, that combine with the combat distances, and then you end up with a well-rounded martial artist, or you end up even with a well-rounded human being, right? I'm sure there are people out there who have experienced this in ways other than through Jeet Kune Do. But for me, this is the thing that taught it to me, to look at life in that way and to have a deeper perception of what's going on, right? Okay, a Jeet Kune Do thing that I hate. So along with the "be water, my friend" quote, right, which everybody has adopted, right, martial artists and non-martial artists, right? I mean, it's just so overused, right, since its debut on the internet, right? The other one that really ticks me off, right, is the one that says, "To hell with circumstances, I create opportunities." Now, I have looked and looked through all of my Bruce Lee materials, and I have never been able to find that. In fact, the very first time that I heard it or saw it, I knew it was wrong, right? I mean, as far as I know, it was wrong. And I knew what it was that they had messed up, right? So I'll show it to you. We'll do this, and then we'll sign off. So it's right here in this book. So, let's see. Okay, let me make sure I can do this the right way, because I don't want to mess this up. There we go. All right, so if you look, I don't know how to adjust this. Okay, there in the corner. It says, "Circumstances? Hell, I make circumstances." All right? So it's not "to hell with circumstances, I create opportunities." It is "circumstances? Hell, I make circumstances." Right? So the next time that you come across that, or you see, or you hear somebody talking about that, you can correct them. one of these days we'll do something with that whole "be water, my friend" also, right? Because there's other quotes and other things that that could replace that one, right? So that is it. I know a couple broadcasts ago I said that we would we would take a page from the Tao of Jeet Kune Do and analyze it or go through it, and I still intend to do that, but I think we already covered so much from those 4 books today that we don't need to do a separate segment on the page of the Tao. So once again, everyone, before we leave, I just did it before we came on. If you go to ilovejeetkundo.com, if you're interested, you guys know that we have the Quick Skills series available. In another few weeks, maybe a couple of months, we'll be filming volume 2, right? So if this is something that you think would benefit you, go ahead, just log on to ilovejeetkundo.com and you'll get all the information right there. Right, so that's it for today. Thanks everyone for tuning in to the I Love Jeet Kune Do broadcast. This is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Do Rebel, signing off. Everybody enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.